He's just talking to a monkey while a monkey touches an iPad.
Don't play with God.
Your number one enemy.
Yeah. This guy is playing tendy chess.
A tactical choice, like a sharp, you know, whoop, we're
Yep.
on to something different. I'm cool with space operas.
You are bugs.
You are bugs.
Yeah, we might be bugs, but we're resilient.
2 out of 10 stars.
Hello and welcome to Road Goes Ever On and On. Today, Sterling and I are talking about the hit science fiction show Three Body Problem, episode 7 and 8. So, spoilers ahead. If you are enjoying this content, please hit that like and subscribe button and turn on that bell for notifications. That way, you can stay up to date with us and we can keep bringing you great content and great breakdowns. And with that, Sterling, should we talk about The Art of War?
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that that book was referenced. There's actually a decent amount of like literature that's in these 2 episodes, but that was brought up, and I thought that was so appropriate with what they're dealing with. Like it's been well studied text, and I think parts of it are still studied and in use today in situations exactly like this. And so I thought that was just kind of interesting, all what they're doing in this show.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like we've seen a lot of these characters, you know, Thomas Wade, the Santi, who have like no reference of the Art of War, but are still maybe taking things from the game, the playbook of the Art of War.
Right. Mentioning this Santi kind of makes me wonder what kind of like texts and literature they have on this kind of topic. Like what have they come up with? That's just a side thing that just
Well,
popped up into my head.
but that it is
And
kind of
also how
interesting because like they're almost like they don't seem to have war with their own people because they've had like the war with the three bodies of these sons.
right,
So like they definitely live by this motto: if one of us survives, we all survive.
right.
Very different from war that like us humans deal with on a yeah, I guess a day-to-day basis.
I don't know. I think that there is a kind of idea in war of, sacrifices having to be made, and the important thing being kind of the survival of your country or people or whatever it is. So it's not necessarily always about you surviving as much as it is your whatever it is you represent surviving. So I do think we have that same idea to a certain extent. Another interesting book that is referenced. So when she is preparing herself, to kind of enter life in her house, I thought it was interesting that they pulled out 2 books. One of them, the second one, was Fermi's Paradox, which to me was very weird for her to have because Fermi's Paradox is all about, there are so many habitable planets in the solar system. The building blocks for life are naturally occurring in the universe. So with all of that being the case, like the numbers say that life should be out there, intelligent life should be out there. So why haven't we seen it? And I just thought that was an interesting book for her to have. It was published in 2014, and she knows intelligent life is out there. There's Fermi's paradox solved.
True, but I think maybe she has the Fermi Paradox book to kind of, since that's probably the most published, book on the Fermi Paradox of why we haven't had alien contacted us. Like maybe she's used that book to show the Santi to be like, look, nobody even on Earth is thinking that you guys are coming near us, that you guys are even a threat or even exist out there, so we can keep moving on with our plan.
Right.
And what did you
I
think of the
thought I thought
second book?
the second book, that was the interesting one to me. That so I did the Fermi's paradox I thought was funny. Game theory is wild stuff. That book to me is really interesting because I've watched a video on it, and it's pretty wild. This idea of, if you run simulations where you have 2 different sides, and if they both choose victory, they get a small amount, or if they like both choose peace, they get a small amount of points. If one side chooses war and the other side chooses peace, the warring one wins. And if they, and so the warring side gets more points, so I think it's like maybe 3 points versus like 1 point for them both choosing peace. And then if they both choose war, you have both sides lose. And you can run this simulation where you have different programs trying, that maybe are more worrying than others. And there's a whole thing of like, what is the best strategy, across all of these different types of computer programs that have all of these different strategies. And the idea is that you can actually look at this and think of this as like a way of how to coexist with other countries, because they're not always going to be good to you, and it certainly doesn't pay to just let them steamroll you and just be the nice one that like lets bad things happen constantly.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the worst strategies that just causes you to like get the least amount of points and kind of lose. So it's interesting because I think that's a much more long term. It's not a one thing. It's not like how do I deal with this one situation. It's like what's the overall strategy of how to deal with aggressiveness or not.
Yeah, and we see that Wenji pulls both books out, Fermi
Mm-hmm.
Paradox and Game Theory, and
Yes.
I think that this ties into her plan. We saw her praying in the last episode, or at least
Yep.
talking to the Santi to be like, a few tricks up my sleeve. And whether it is going to be successful, like, we saw her talk to Tatiana a little bit at the end of this episode, and maybe
Yeah.
she was able to implant, some ideas into Tatiana to get to the Santi that maybe be like, hey, here's the game theory where if, you want to war with us and we don't lie down and take it, you're gonna have problems too, and potentially, or she's even playing a longer game with her little joke to Saul.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. I have some questions on that. But I kind of agree with you where I think she is, even though she's taking her life, that she is playing a longer game, or was planning on taking her life. I think she's definitely playing a longer game. In fact, I don't think that taking her life was like giving up. If anything, I think it was actually a tactical choice.
And so, what do you think the tactical choice in that would be?
I think that her conversation with Saul could have easily been overlooked as just a weird conversation with like a weird joke. But the fact that he's the last person that she chose to spoke to before she decided to take her life, and she said something that doesn't make sense, so it seems like there's got to be something hidden there. I think that to me was telegraphing to the Santee how important what she did was.
I do, I do think that her joke had a hidden message in it for sure. Like, I think the overall message was, you know, don't play with God, right? And the Santi are like God in this case to humans, and it wasn't quite like a joke. Like, it didn't seem like there was like a punchline. Like, the punchline was don't play with God, which is almost a warning instead of a joke. And then she even could tell that Saul didn't really take it as a joke and says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I hope my joke doesn't cause you too much trouble," which is probably trouble from the Santee.
I think she knows it's going to cause trouble. I think that this comes back to kind of like the one of the issues that the Santi had with us early on of realizing that we're liars, and that even in simple ways like when we're telling stories that is technically a lie, and that we don't have the ability to communicate the same way as the Santee, that we can say things and mean something different. Like when Mike Evans called the people that were against the Santee, he referenced them as being bugs, and the Sophon was like, they're not bugs, and he's like, no, I mean they're insignificant.
Like, yeah, they
Um,
almost can't pick up on like metaphors
they
or
can't because they're literal. Like when they say things, they express all of it. You know, they can't they don't have a way of hiding things. And so I think that that joke that she told, I think is probably driving them nuts and occupying so much time, you know, of like what kind of how can that have a different meaning? What could that even mean? You know? And I think that's the beauty of our language is that things can have double meanings and there can be metaphors for things. And we'll come back to that because I think there are other kind of metaphors and some of these kind of showings of things being of the way our language works. But I think she did that very intentionally to add weight to that conversation. So the Santi are like, this is important and we don't understand it and it's breaking our brain. Like, we're so superior, but we can't figure out what this means.
so. We'll definitely get into Saul and the Wall Facer in a little bit, but
It's all in the wall, Phaser.
do you think that when she talked to him and gave this metaphor little riddle that that was what was the indirect cause for him being
100%.
okay, like that was
I,
like
I, I 100% think that it is that the people from the UN know that the Santi want him dead. He is currently enemy number one. So, I mean, like, your enemy's enemy is your friend. You know, like this. I think they realize that this is their greatest ally, and I do think that I don't know if everyone has a clue of the correlation between Saul being important and Saul being the last person that she talked to, like at least went out of her way to talk to. I know that Clarence made that just that correlation,
right.
and I don't know if that's just because Clarence is really clever. I don't know if other people have made that or not, but I definitely think that that was the impetus was like if the Santi want him dead, then we need him alive.
Cuz I did feel like when they were talking about that and how she's saying that there's a direct reason and an indirect reason, and we didn't really get like a clarification on the indirect reason. And she talks to him, and then it's like everybody in the United Nations is just on board, like, yep, that's our guy, like we know that it's him. What was the impetus to make the whole of the UN be like, yeah, that's him? Just a couple
I
of
think I assume that the UN had already voted on it, and this was just the ceremony where they were making it public and like announcing it over broadcast.
right. So like, but when they voted for it originally, there might not have been that moment where his life was where they tried to take his life. So like, what was the impetus for the UN to be like, we're all on board with Saul? Like that's kind of if they didn't know about that conversation with Wenjin, Ye
Mm.
Wenjin, that why would they all be like, we know that this is the guy?
You know, I didn't I had thought that that decision was made with that knowledge. Like I don't know if they'd been talking about it for some time. Maybe there was like a third candidate who was going to take that place, and then after that, like hit job, that they're like, well, let's make a quick change. I don't know. I assumed it was based off that knowledge,
Okay. Well,
but
yeah.
I didn't think about the fact it happened pretty recently. So it's like, and wheels like this are normally turning much longer, for this stuff to happen. So I don't know.
I mean, it is kind of hard with the timeline in this show, I will say. Like earlier with Augie, we see her talking about like building the nanofibers for the sale, and like, can you make it work? And she's like, okay, yeah, I can make it work. And then the next scene later with Augie, she's resigning, and then we cut to the scene of the launch, and the sale is working fine, like it's a perfectly
Right.
built sail. So there is a little bit of weird timing things, but I expect this with D&D, so they don't know how to get their timing right.
They've never been ones to spend time on travel when it's in their hands.
Okay, going back to the art of war.
Yes.
Okay, I don't think anybody understands the art of war like Thomas Wade understands the art of war.
Yeah.
This guy is playing 10D chess right now with the Santi. And what I want to know what you think of his plan of freezing himself until the Santi get here, waking himself up once a week, dealing with all the shit that's gone down.
Right.
What are your thoughts?
That's, it's interesting because it makes him very different from so many of the other people. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting here is like with these big plays that are being made, many of these people, like the Attorney General of like the UN, choosing, Saul for that position, she's never going to know if that gamble paid off, and it's a huge gamble. But it's interesting that that Thomas Wade has this awareness of there is only one tactical brain that can beat the Santi, and it's mine. And I buy it. He's the way he makes decisions, the way he gets people around him, finding the people that will get him things done when everybody is saying like that's impossible. The experts
Right.
are like we can't do that right now. Give us a few decades. And he's like, "No, I want it now."
I
I think he is that tactical brain that
I mean, I do too. He was talking about, Aristotle, where he's talking about, like, it's also a fool to, be humble. Like, like, oh, you can't be
mm-hmm,
this egocentric, think that you're, like, the savior of the world. But it is also, like, don't be afraid to, like, not be humble and, like, actually be that person. And, honestly, like, I think, like, the motivation behind it, right? Like, he's gonna lose everything he loves. Like, in a way, he's making a huge sacrifice himself to make sure that he's here when the Santi arrive.
right. And it's also wild that he's such a big picture thinker that he understands that he can just pop in and out and have a bigger impact pushing that big picture than worrying about like day-to-day details. There are plenty of people that will be able to execute his plan. He's the only person that has the brain to be able to come up with the plans though. So like that's wild that he recognizes that he can do that because I
And
don't I don't think most people have that kind of power.
and knowing what kind of target that puts on his back. So every time he's awake for a week, the Santi realize how much of a threat he is, and they're just gonna constantly make him see whatever they want him to see, and just ruin the week that he is alive for.
Right. I like the kind of chess comparison. It's it's interesting because that's also kind of a war game. You literally have like pawns and knights. Game theory is really weird in that it sounds like it's running programs against each other to see which one gets the most amount of points, but it's something that is legitimately used as a way of thinking about like what are the best policies for countries dealing with other countries. Like it's wild that there are so many things that are games that also teach us about war. I think Go was something that was used for quite some time to teach these kind of concepts. It's just wild that there is a legitimate correlation between how you think about decisions in certain games and that has like a direct correlation to making the right types of complex decisions in war.
Like a very complex decision when he goes and talks to Will. And I think this is a good transition to talk about Will and the Staircase Project.
Yes.
But he goes and talks, he gives him, a document, swear your fealty to Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And Will rejects it. But yet his rejection of that letter makes him more valuable to this project
Yes.
and being in this project than had he signed it. Like, if he had signed it, he'd probably be like, no, you're no good. You're out, Will. Like,
Right.
the amount of, like, forethought to think of, like, we want a guy that doesn't care about Earth up there.
Yeah, yeah. Isn't not necessarily doesn't care about, but isn't willing to swear loyalty.
Yeah.
I do think that his, a lot of what he loves is here, but he's also saying like, I mean, if it turns out that I meet these guys and they're actually much cooler than you guys, I don't have that information. That's not fair for me to do that. But I think that doing that, I think he knew that there was probably a Sophon in the room watching, and now they realize that they can potentially turn this guy, so why not bring him on the ship? Versus somebody who's going to do everything that they can to, to destroy the Santi or like give them wrong information or whatever. Like I think they seeing that they're going to report back, and the Santi are going to be much more likely to say, "Yeah, hey, let's take this guy on."
They were
He's
even
not
excited. They were excited to meet him. They would have like,
right.
we would have loved to meet Will Downing.
Yeah. So I think that it's wild how Thomas Wade is doing that. I forgot to mention in kind of the last section, when you see Thomas Wade in his office, he already talked about like that stirrup, from Genghis Khan or whatever. But he also has, a helmet from some century. He's got, behind him, that might be one of those like hanging rug pieces that came with the manor, because it is an old manor, but it also did seem to depict maybe something kind of warring. And I think that he's the kind of person that studies all of these like past wars, and is just like constantly in that and has this headspace in that kind of everything that has happened, and then that kind of game theory of like everything that can be done to move these pieces. Guys, really smart with that,
Well,
and love it.
but now we have to question his pride and joy project, the staircase project, which originally we're sending a whole person up there, frozen, but we're just sending Will's brain. He's already dying. We're gonna send him out. The project fails. What's the next step, Thomas Wade? Thomas Wade got all the answers?
But I think it was a failure for the Oxford Five, because they love the person that they sent up. I don't think it was necessarily a failure for Thomas Wade. I think that they'll probably do it again, but
You think?
better. I think about exploding rockets of SpaceX and how every time they explode, every time that there's an explosion, they don't treat it as a failure. There were things that they were trying to. They're like a build fast type company
Mm-hmm.
and learn from your mistakes, which is a lot of what engineering is like learning from your mistakes. And so they're willing to build a rocket that they know might explode, but they're trying to test like this launch pad, will it be able to handle this, and will it not cause like catastrophic failure? And so like the fact that the rocket lifted off and there was no harm with this part, they're like, okay, cool, that this launch was a success. Like they have an exploding rocket, and because it ticks certain checkboxes of like we were looking for this, this, and this, and we got these three things, that was a success. And I think that the success here was, and Clarence said it, that Jin got an object to move faster than humans have ever gotten it to move.
True.
And so in that end, it was a success. It sucks for the Oxford Five because that was their friend.
Yeah. So, to your point, we do see Jin is heartbroken when
Yeah,
the mission seems to fail. And Thomas Wade does say something to her. We don't know what he says,
I know.
but he does say something to her, and Thomas Wade doesn't look too concerned. A lot of people in that room looked like it was a failure. Thomas Wade, he didn't. He still seemed pretty calm and collected.
I kind of wonder if putting the seeds on there was his way of trying to take care of Jin, who's like doing great things for him, but Thomas Wade making that decision and knowing like the likelihood of success is pretty small. So is this actually going to set us back at all?
Or just get into good favor with Jin.
Right. Like if this project is likely going to she said like it's like threading a needle 300 times,
Mm-hmm.
if that's not very likely, and we can at least learn from it and have some good takeaways, and she's one of the smart ones that's helping out, why not give her something positive?
True. Yeah, that makes sense.
And once again, that could be like these like chess moves.
I mean, I do think another chess move that he did was when he told Jin that Will gave her that star. Like, this guy knows everything all the time, and he
Right.
knows he knew that Will gave her the star, even though he's not connected to Stars Our Destination. And then
Right.
he just casually asks her, like right before he's about to, die, and he's like, "Oh, did you thank him in person?" Like he wanted her to know that Will gave that star.
Mm-hmm.
He is cunning, and he's got
He
a lot of
that's a good word for it. It is cunning.
I think that if anybody can beat the Santee, Thomas Wade can do it.
Oh yeah. But I think another one of the stars of this, even if it went poorly, is unfortunately Will. And I thought it was a really interesting depiction of like coming to peace with the end of your life. It definitely seems like Will has a certain like has come to terms with what is going to happen, and he's okay with it. Like he has found peace. He's even willing to do things for other people. He's what he did for his sister, and his sister seems like a terrible person.
Terrible. As on his deathbed asking for money.
Right, right. For all of his money.
Yeah.
Like all the money you got from our parents, we want that.
Yeah, give that to us.
Us.
And how they didn't even know anything about him. He's like, "What if I have somebody
Right.
in my life?" And
Huh?
oh, I bet she's great. And he's like, "What if it's not a girl?" Like just to throw
Yeah.
like, "You don't know who I am. Why
Yeah.
why?" But yet he's a good-hearted man.
So I thought it was interesting kind of seeing that portrayal of how he's come to peace with that. He doesn't want to profess his love to Jin because that would ruin her life. Like why upend this relationship that she has when I'm gonna die? And then he finds a purpose, something he can do that is kind of like rooting for Jin.
Well, I think that was like a big catalyst to make him want to do it. Like, I think if Jin wasn't involved,
Hmm.
he'd maybe be like, meh. But the fact that he was just like, this would be a huge accomplishment for you. And like, who do you have as backups? And she's like, oh, we don't have anybody. And he's like, okay, well, this would be great for you. Like, this could get you like to prominence. And of course, I'm willing to do it.
Oh yeah. Also, I thought Augie's parting gift to Will I thought was interesting. Don Julio 1942, and to a certain extent, and I doubt that the books and or the showrunners necessarily had this intention, but I thought that liquor was very appropriate, and it's like constantly in there since he's going to be a living brain in space. They've like Thomas Wade's thing. This goes back to like his cunning. Thomas Wade realizes, we have a weight issue, like, and the person is a lot of that. Like, how can we distill a person down to their essence and realize, like, who else would have come up with that idea of we can just cut the brain out and send the brain? We don't need the person, we just need their brain. That's crazy level of cunning, right? And that to me is kind of like liquor. You first have to make alcohol. You generally make something beer like or wine like, with like fruit or with grain, and that has a lower alcohol content, and then you distill the alcohol because that boils at a lower point than the other liquids. And so you can take like the essence of it, the stronger part, and as that collects into another container, you can now have like the distillation of the alcohol, which is like the liquor. And I thought that was kind of interesting, kind of parallel to like distilling a person down to like a brain, like what's the bare minimum of it, and kind of similar with that DJ 1942.
I like that. I don't think this is the end of Will.
I'm thinking that too.
I know it seemed like a failure, but I could imagine the Santi trying to pick up Will.
I could definitely see it. But at the same time, I also like that it wasn't, and Dawn said the same thing, that we both like that it wasn't, the project wasn't an instant success.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when you, I don't know, sometimes when we have these like crazy plans and they work on the first try, it's pretty unrealistic. And
Yeah.
I do like that it at least looked like a failure. We'll see if it was or not, because that did make it look more realistic.
I think if anything of like why it's a failure is it's not going to get there in 200 years, right? Originally that was the plan, it was going to get there in 200 years. I think maybe now it'll meet them 350 years or somewhere like that. So like originally if we didn't have these bombs, it would have been 398 years to get there. Not really worth our time. Maybe
Right.
shaved off 50 years, possibly.
Right.
But I do think we'll see Will again.
I I wondered about that, and I can very potentially see that. One last thing I had to say about Will, and this was, I already referenced that there's decent amount of references to literature. We've had, like the Art of War. We had like the two books, Game Theory, Fermi's Paradox. Will and Saul end up talking about the Eagle and the Child, the pub where C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, had frequented together. And like those are two huge names in literature that I love so much from my childhood. And so I appreciated that reference. And I also kind of think that those two are interesting because, like, especially C.S. Lewis, because like his stuff is overtly Christian. And this show, it's interesting how dealing with aliens that are so superior to us that they get treated like gods.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's so much of, for something that is not itself overtly religious, it kind of talks a lot about religion. Like you see, like religious zealots,
Yeah.
that are doing things in their, like the name of their higher powers. Like this show actually talks a lot about religion in a weird way.
Yeah, it also deals like with Will, it's dealing with like death and like the afterlife of death, if there is
Right.
an afterlife. It does, it even talking Yuenji's joke about, you know playing with God. Like there is a lot of religious undertones in it, but it's not directly, talking about religion.
Yeah. So I thought that was an interesting reference because I think that, those have been like two literary giants that religion was central to.
That you're right about a lot of books in this, and I liked the parallel when he talked about with Jin with the fairy tales and science fiction.
Right.
It was almost like a meta narrative of like what they are. Like they are like they're in a science fiction book and they're like, oh, it's fairy tales and science fiction, and I could see how science fiction could be classified as like a fairy tale in the distant future, like talking about time traveling, space travel, aliens showing up. Like in a way these are all like modern day fairy tales.
And there is past science fiction that it their predictions have come true, and they are no longer, at the time it was written about something that didn't exist, but now those things do exist, and now it's interesting being able to look back on them and say, did that person properly predict the ramifications of that technology? Hopefully we don't have to find out something like that with this series,
Hopefully
or
not.
or hopefully like any post-apocalyptic kind of series.
I'll take a Star Trek. That sounds good. Star Trek future. I'm
Yeah,
fine with
yeah,
that.
no, I'm cool with space operas. It's
Yeah.
the like Hunger Games type one I'm
Oh.
not so interested in.
Mad Max Fury Road, get out of here.
Let's chat about the next plan with the Santi, the wall facers.
The Wall Facers. I rescind everything I said about Saul having nothing to do in this show.
Okay, yep. I told you it was coming,
You did tell me it was coming.
and not because I knew it because this isn't in book one.
Right, we got
But
a
I just
comment that said
I just thought.
each character was grouped in different books. Shout out to that commenter. But yeah, I thought Saul was a kind of a nothing burger, and I feel like the last episode really like fleshed him out as a character as well.
The wild thing is that so you can look at Will and you can say, he didn't accomplish much, but he tried really hard. In fact, to a certain extent, like his sister kind of said that, and he was like, "No, I did what I wanted to do," and he said that he's smart but not smart enough. So it's like there are certain things he couldn't do.
Play the game.
Versus, yes, and versus, I think that there was one scene in particular that really showed how much of an intentional slacker Saul is, and that was when Nora's like, "You don't even know what my name is," and it's legitimately seemed like he didn't know what her name was, and then when she dies, he says Nora, and so he even wants the people around him to think that
I
he doesn't care or he's a slacker or
Well, I took that a little bit differently, actually.
okay. Okay.
So a little bit with the slacker, vibe, but I took it as I think Saul has trouble connecting with people and like
Okay.
being his true self around people. And so like I think maybe the closest person he could maybe do that with is Augie, and that's why he kind of puts her on the back burner. Like he doesn't want to, let Augie down, let himself down. So he's like emotionally distant on purpose. And
Yep.
so I think he's so smart and like so like he could be so good at what he does that of course he has had countless one night stands, and he intentionally makes them feel like they're forgettable so he doesn't have to deal with them again. And
Right.
so I think that like when I saw that whole
But that
Nora
that goes
scene,
back to like such a intentional slacker.
yeah,
Like he did that on purpose.
right. He didn't want the any baggage with Nora, so he purposefully made it seem like he didn't know her name. And just like
Yeah.
how he worked at, Yi Wen Jin,
Yuwenji.
Wenji said to him like, you could have ran your own physics lab. Like why were you working as a junior one in Vera's lab?
Right.
And yeah.
I think as he was being taken to the UN, there's a statue of a knotted gun. And to me, that once again reminded me of our forms of communication and how you could say that they're lying, but it's like we use things like metaphors. I'm sure that the Sophons look at that and report it back to the Santee, and the Santee are like, that is not the best way to destroy a gun. But that's not the point.
Right.
It's a metaphor. It's not like a real way to destroy a gun. It's a metaphor for like stopping violence. So I just thought that was kind of interesting because it to me was very perfect with like them not being able to communicate untruths and how we use that to our advantage in a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful metaphorical way.
Right. Now, what do you think of the Wallfacer project as a whole?
It's it's pretty wild, and it to me that makes sense if you like that's the one advantage that we have is that we can hide things. Unfortunately, the moment that we communicate those things, they're public. So it like if we can keep it to ourselves until the right time, then it can be a secret from the Santee. And that's the one thing they can't do is like get in our minds. So
And the fact that they have basically carte blanche to do whatever they want.
right, as long
That's
as it doesn't break like international treaties.
right. That's crazy to me. Like, you guys, we told two, it seemed like they told the first two that they were part of this program. Like, they all seemed very ready to accept this
Right.
role. And Saul was the only one that was kind of like on the fence about it. But they
Yeah.
basically, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to report to anyone. You don't have to say anything out. We don't want you to say anything out loud. Like, that's a lot of power to give somebody.
And you don't have to explain your actions. That's the wild part. So they can bark out a command that seems absolutely crazy, and it cannot be questioned. It's just like you don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to. We'll do it.
I I did really like how even when Saul like rejected the position, he's like, "No, I don't want this. Like, I am thoroughly rejecting it." She's like, "Okay, you can do that." You know, and
Right.
it's even still like everybody's just like listen to his order. Like, yeah, he can reject the position, but he's still a wall facer, so I'll do whatever he says.
That's okay. So I what I thought was interesting is like the attorney general. Her response was kind of a wink and a nod. As far as he's like, so I can do whatever I want. So I can leave right now. Or he's like, I don't remember exactly what it was, but he was like, I can leave right now. And she says, you can do whatever you want,
Oh yeah,
which is basically her way of saying you're still a wall facer. Like
right.
you have the authority to do whatever you want, including leaving right now. That's not you leaving the program. That like you have the authority to do whatever you want. Clarence, does something kind of similar or says something kind of similar that makes it kind of like very much in the know. The one character that I thought was very funny that was just taking his stuff at face value, but like still doing his job. Sebastian Kent, the guy who's like
The
one
liaison,
of his,
right?
yeah, the liaison. Yeah, yeah. Like Clarence was like, I left the program, right? He's like, yeah. It was very straight face, and there was no kind of like, I know, sir.
Right. He's talking
And the
about
reason,
the yeah
yeah,
the you the program is public knowledge now, and he's
yes,
like, yes, and you said that I didn't accept the position. Yes, that was reported. Like, just very straight face.
very the reason that was, and I know it wasn't meant to be funny, but the reason that was very comical to me is because he plays a clueless character on Silicon Valley. He plays Nelson Spaghetti, whose nickname is Big Head, and he's absolutely clueless. And that's the kind of thing that he might say in that show, not understanding what a character is trying like that a character is trying to make a point.
That's funny.
Instead just like replying to the surface level of like, yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. All right.
And so I know he wasn't being clueless in this one, but in it reminded me very much of that character. So it was a little bit hard to take him seriously, but I did enjoy the portrayal.
I took him seriously. It's like, I want to meet the leader of the UN. Oh, she's waiting for you right now.
Right. So Saul makes a comment to Nora about, if everybody just had one child, like the population could just naturally die off. And maybe I think I'm being smarter than I am, and he understands something that I don't necessarily. But I think that causes its own problem. Like we are seeing countries whose populations are shrinking greatly. It's generally happening across the world. There are countries that are not following that trend, but like especially I think in Japan, China, maybe Italy, there's a big problem of aging populations, and when you have countries shrinking instead of growing, a big problem that you have is that generally the money and effort from the young support the elderly as they're no longer able to support themselves. But if the elderly population is larger than the young population, it's a huge burden on them and not something that's necessarily viable. And it makes taking care of a number of things very difficult.
Well, yeah.
So
Even the workforce in general is you know less. So if you have just basically physically taxing jobs that the elderly can't perform, then your whole system of governance and your whole means of production, it all kind of comes crumbling down.
right, you have cities and towns whose populations are dwindling so much that they can no longer take care of their infrastructure. And then there's like those people who live there their whole lives that don't want to leave, but it's also like it's turning into a ghost town. And so you feel like you have to move to these areas with more population. It Saul was very casual about that. But that has not a great way to wind down a civilization. Like it has its own problems, and I don't recommend it.
Gotcha.
2 out of 10 stars.
2 out of 10 stars. I give it a 4 out
Two
of
out of
10
ten stars.
stars. That's how we beat climate change. Less people. Boom. Oh, same. So I think the next topic. You are bugs.
You are bugs. So the I've one of my complaints has been them cutting things out from the books.
Okay. Right.
There was one shot. I know this is like a very minor gripe that probably isn't deserved. It was one shot that was very much from the second book that I don't think should have been in because I don't think it made any sense. When Yi Wenji, Saul are at the graveyard and there's a close up of a bug crawling
On the graves.
in like the engraving of the gravestone, that's from the book. And to me, that was like without the context of that scene in the book, it was just a weird shot.
I might disagree a little bit that it was a weird shot because I took it. I haven't read the books.
Yeah,
But I had to there. I can't remember. There was a scene that preceded it, and I can't remember the scene. But I think it might be Thomas Wade talking about that we're bugs or something, and then it cuts to the bug, and to me it felt like that was a bug, almost like trapped in a maze. You know, the engraving, trying to navigate and figure out its solution and our solution to deal with the Santee.
you know what? That's definitely not 100%, but that's actually surprisingly close to the scene. It's like the very intro of the second book. There's it goes into the bug's head as it's moving through in engravings, and how certain angles and shapes, like sharp turns versus like curves, are scary or pleasing to it. And I think it's kind of an allusion to like how incomprehensible a greater civilization's effect can be to like a lesser brain. And so it goes into much more detail there, and I kind of felt like in a passing shot like that it really didn't have the same impact and was just a few wasted frames that could have been spent better doing something else.
That's funny because I without having the context of the book, I thought it was a great
Yeah.
little like. I was like, oh, that's a cool little metaphor for bugs. That
I'm curious. If it's okay if it translated to any portion of the population, then it was worth it. I thought without okay, I'm 100% I'm wrong. Cicadas are brought up a few times,
Yes.
and I thought this show is very right here right now. Like it's got Biden in it. There's like Tapper. What's his name? The one of the
Jake
news
Tapper.
guys.
Jake Tapper.
Jake Tapper is on there, and we're about to deal with a huge cicada emergence in parts of the country, and so that felt like that specific bug felt extremely appropriate for the right here, right now.
Yeah, and also makes another great metaphor of how Clarence puts it at the end of we are in a way trying to say that humanity's resilient. Like we've tried to kill bugs, we've tried to get rid of bugs. We like other animals like the dodo bird, we're good at it, making extinct, but we can't make bugs extinct. They keep fighting back, they keep crawling back, and maybe the Santee come and enslave us for 1,000 years or destroy us, but if humanity is left alive at some point, humanity can fight back, and
If one of us survives,
we all survive.
we all survive. I think this kind of goes back to when you said how Clarence described bugs. I think this kind of goes back to the beauty of our language. That's like one of the double-edged swords of something like a metaphor. Once you put it out there, it's up to anybody's interpretation. So Mike Evans was the one who taught the Santee about that you can use bugs as a way to describe things that are, a nuisance and are easily killable. And so the Santee jump on that and they use that in order to scare us and show us, our place in this universe is we're just bugs, and they only think about the one meaning that they've been taught. But Clarence looks at it another way, and he's like, sure, it's easy to kill a bunch of them, but you can never get rid of them. So in another aspect, they're resilient. And he like takes that metaphor and takes it back for humanity, and potentially gives us this positive outlook on them trying to, like, that's the beauty of a metaphor.
Yeah, we might be bugs, but we're resilient.
Right. And that, so I know that as a scientist, it might seem weird for me to, not that I am a scientist. I love science. I'm not a scientist. Sorry. Not a scientist. I, I love science, and so it might seem that like loving the imprecision of communication would be a fault in humanity, and so not something you would enjoy. But I love it. I love art. I love books. I love that things can have those multiple meanings. I love things like, in art, like impressionism, post-impressionism, like Van Gogh can portray feelings. You can look at his paintings and it can evoke like the twinkling of stars and like the movement of air in a way that like perfect communication, like a picture, just can't.
True.
So I love it. I love the fault in our communication that like we can say things that people can mistake, but it also can be used in a good way and create like, metaphors and
Just
similes and
like a great metaphor, the pen is mightier than the sword, you know? It's the sword
yeah.
is typically used for war, but pens can end wars, you know? And
Right.
it's, like I can't take a pen and actually end a war with it, but the idea of it, and like, yeah, our language, we do have language is beautiful. The things that you can do with language, it's very awesome.
I've got a few more cicada related things, and I'll go through them too quickly, so it's not just me yapping. But one, I don't know if you've had much experience with like the big broods of cicadas at all. Have you?
No, I have not.
Are they are they a thing in Colorado?
We I Since I've been in Colorado, I haven't seen like big cicadas. Like we get like we get like some, but they're littler ones that come through, and they're not like the
Not
loud
the
ones.
size of the cicada. Like the broods are the one that come out in like prime numbered years versus like yearly.
I don't think so.
And when that happens, it's wild. So I in the Washington D.C. area, we had one of those when I was living there, and it's wild how many there are, and it's going to be worse in parts of the country where two broods are emerging at the same time. But like there were times and places where it was literally tough not to step on cicadas because they were just like covering the ground in the air, hitting you. You would have to like step on cicadas because there were just so many of them. So I remember the Washington Post had an article on like things you can do with cicadas. So it had like recipes. And people do talk about that when the big broods come out. Because sometimes there's just so many. It's like, what else are you gonna do? Why not?
Cook them.
Why not cook? You know?
Did you try any of these recipes?
I didn't. I was young and not as adventurous as I was now. I would definitely try it now. But and I think that this is going to kind of get into the resiliency of life in general, not just bugs, but life in general, and how I think we can potentially surprise the Santee. Is I think the cicadas are a great example of this because these broods that come out in prime years, that's a defense against predators. And it's a wild defense that, it is prime numbers aren't common. And so it's hard for predators to follow a cycle like that. Like how do they fall into a 7-year cycle, or a 13-year cycle? That's just it's not the kind of thing that predators can adapt to, and therefore this like weird natural thing that a bunch of those species have come up with, like not come but like evolved into kind of by coincidence, is one of their greatest strengths, and one of the reasons why predators will never be able to be plentiful enough to deal with them, because if the population is large enough to deal with 7-year cicadas, they're going to starve 6 years.
Yeah.
And so when they come out, they just come out in such a large mass that there is, numerous of them can die and it won't have any impact on
Yeah.
the greater population. And then because prime numbers are so rare and don't line up very well, when you have what's happening right now, like two broods coming out, that is so rare that two numbers like two different prime numbers like that line up. It's going to be huge in the areas where those are coming out.
Yeah,
Um,
I heard it's
Look
mostly
for recipes.
Midwest and the South. They're coming for you. Watch out for the cicadas.
All right, let's chat. Filmmaking.
Filmmaking. Let's chat about it.
For the most part, I'm enjoying the music in this.
Okay.
For the
Okay.
most part.
But not the main theme.
I hate the main theme. I absolutely hate it. And because I hate it, I'm bummed that they used it as the way to end this season,
Yeah.
which is funny because this won't be a spoiler because it's not like a plot point, but Dawn and I just finished Shogun, and they do the same thing. They close out the season with the opening intro. But not only do I like that intro better, but I also thought that they did a better job of it, where it first started out as like an orchestral piece where you couldn't recognize it was the intro, and then you started to be like, I know this. And then you recognize that it's the opening song, and then it continues a little bit into the end of that scene, and then, it goes cuts to black, music continues into the credit. Beautiful song, beautiful way to close it out. Loved it. But for the most part, I hate this intro, and I'm bummed that they used it in the end. But like there were really good when Tatiana got her headset. This really ominous music came in, and you could see that crazy look on her face again. Music was perfect for that. It goes from that, transitions into the scene where they're moving Will's brain from one frozen capsule into the rocket that's going to contain it, and the music transitions beautifully into, you know, tension and trepidation. So like I felt like it did a great job of transitioning us from this one scene to this other scene. So I, for the most part, love the music composition in the show. It's just at the end I
Yeah.
have the issue.
That's fair. I don't know if other than the Lana Del Rey needle drop, I don't really. There were a couple times when I would listen to the music, and I agree with the Will one going into the spaceship. I thought was great, but yeah, for the most part, I hadn't really noticed too much with the music other than the main theme plays a couple times. I know you had Will being spoiled because of the composer. I'm assuming
I
that's
hate it
the
so
big.
much. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was it. It was like in one sentence before I could realize I needed to stop reading. It was something something. Will's brain launched into space. I was like, well, that's
And you knew it was his brain. It wasn't just
but
Will
yeah,
being.
yes. So it was a double spoiler. If it had
Yeah.
just been Will, that would be yeah, and that goes back to me hating Netflix's business model
Right.
of dumping everything at once. Like there I feel like this would have been a really great article to read partway through the series to get me further pumped up about it. Of like, here's an interview with the composer of this, and it builds on the hype. It gives me something to do while I'm waiting for the next episode. It builds the hype. It keeps the conversation going. But no, you can't.
You can't read
If
it.
it's you can't read anything until you're done with a show on Netflix, because you have to assume that it's talking about the entire show.
Readings for dummies. Anyway, one one thing
Oh,
I
go
did
ahead.
like about the filmmaking was there
Yeah.
was a bit of a bookend that we saw with Saul and Augie. Well,
Hmm.
there was a couple bookends with Saul and his character relationships. Like episode 7, Saul, like it opens up with Saul talking to Will, like they're, having, they're just like being friends. They're talking about Jin's
Yeah.
star, talking about telling Jin she loves you or that you love Jin. And then
Yeah.
that episode ends with Will and Saul talking about being launched into the stars and like what are his options of going up there. And you
Yeah.
know Saul did have these nice little bookend moments, and like the series as a whole, there was Augie, when we first meet Augie in the bar and they're talking about the things that are happening with science. She is like, I'm trying to call Saul and he won't answer. And at the end of this episode, when he, maybe came to the realization that Augie does love him for who he is, even though he's
Yeah.
a slacker, he's got a little bit of meat on his bones, you know, Augie's words, not
Right.
Hayden, just Augie's words. But then he calls her and she ignores him.
Yeah. Similar to similar but different from like bookends. One of the interesting techniques that they used, at least in ones that like when we see Thomas Wade in the private jet and the Sophon talks to him, kind of a terrifying scene, seeing what they one that they're claiming that he's part of the plan and that there's a place for him. That's kind of like he's should be your number one enemy.
Yeah.
And then what they are saying that they are going to do to him, crazy. It's a very unsettling scene. And I like that they used a match cut to go from there. You see the plane with the night sky, plane goes out of frame, and then camera goes down to the hotel where Augie, Clarence, Saul are, and it's a much gentler cut and gives us a moment to like get out of that unsettling thing versus just having like a sharp, you know, whoop, we're
Yep.
onto something different.
Yeah.
So like that choice.
There were little complaints I had throughout the whole series of
Oh,
certain.
good, because I'm about to lob a complaint.
Oh,
Once,
maybe this might be the
so
same
this is
complaint.
perfect timing.
Perfect.
I don't think so.
I
We'll
love when
see.
we complain at the same time. It's great. There were some shots where they would make certain things out of focus that I didn't love. Like there were a couple scenes with like Will where like he's talking and like things that are in the same field of view as him were blurry. And also early on when
Dawn asked if there was something wrong with our TV. She
okay,
was like, there. She was like, we spent too much money for this to be crapping out this soon. I was like, I think that's just a very strong bokeh effect that's not
yeah,
on what you would expect it to be on.
yeah, there was, I think also like when they went when Yi Wenji, this was like in the middle of the season, they were at the cemetery, and I can't remember who she was talking to there, but like the whole background of the cemetery was so blurry. Like you're like, oh, they could be anywhere. Like it's
Right.
just too blurry. Which I
Yeah,
guess would say
Don's really gonna appreciate hearing somebody else complain about that because I wasn't dismissive, but I was like, it's bokeh, that's a choice. It's a weird choice, but it's a
yeah.
choice.
I thought it was excessive at
She didn't
points.
like it. Yeah.
All right, give me your
Uh,
complaints. Throw them at me.
it's just well, it's a two-parter on the same scene. The CGI monkey was terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a two-parter because it very much took me out of that scene, and it's doing like close-ups on the monkey, like looking at the iPad to know which one to do, and so it's like it's very much in your face. But the other thing I thought was a funny mistake that I don't think they realized they made. So this scientist is doing a demonstration of how this monkey was in cryogenic freezing, can very quickly be unfrozen, and cognitively it's still there. Let me show you how good this monkey is. Like that it's still cognitively there. And so it does some pretty impressive tests, right? Like touch the orange thing, touch the thing that has 4 squares in it. So it has to
Mm-hmm.
like know the shape and the quantity of them. The scientist is talking in a foreign language. Nobody knows what he's trying to demonstrate. Nobody. So like nobody knows that he says touch the orange one and then it touches the orange one. Okay, touch the one with 4 squares and it touches the one with 4 squares. He's just talking to a monkey while a monkey touches an iPad. Like what? You couldn't
Success.
have you couldn't have done this later, bro?
Nope, it was success. He trained the monkey in a different language. They don't need to know, just in case they
What?
wanted it to be a different language, in case the monkey started pushing different buttons. So they could
Like
just
what's
prove it that he did it. It's
like
logical.
what was the point of this demo? He didn't like explain to the okay, I'm gonna tell him to touch the orange one, and then he says it, and then he touches like
Yeah,
it's supposed to be impact. I didn't even catch it the first time, but then the second time I was like, what does this look like to anybody that's watching this?
right.
Cool, you
I
gave him an iPad with the world's dumbest game.
and he pushed some buttons and then you gave him a
But-
banana. And then he threw up. Is it even good? I don't know if this is a success.
and all of this while I'm thinking about how bad this terrible CGI monkey was.
Yeah. It was
I
pretty
assume they
bad.
had a half decent budget, and I didn't think that CGI monkey was a good choice for that budget.
No, no. You know, if they had anywhere near the budget of Game of Thrones making some dragons that look pretty realistic, make a monkey look a little bit better.
Right.
And disclaimer, technically not a monkey, it's an ape, but anyway.
I think you have some thoughts on season 2 or questions.
Just some, some questions and theories of where you think it's going and do you think at some point Saul will fully embrace the wall facer job?
It's possible he already has.
Okay.
It's vaguely possible. It's at this point, if he's playing chess, he might have already made his
Couple
first
moves.
moves.
Okay. Yeah,
In-
I could imagine that.
Possibly.
Well,
But I definitely think he will embrace it. There is part of me that wonders whether or not. So like Vera made comments about him being the only person that could figure this out. Yi Wenji made a comment about him being smart. There is a small part of me that does wonder whether or not this was a brilliant idea of Yi Wenji's to waste the Sophon's time of like giving Saul this encoded message that then makes him a target, and then she like goes to take her life. They end up going to like take her life for her, and that makes him seem so much more important, which makes him the forefront. So then he gets added to the wall facers, and all of this is like nobody knows why he's important to the Santi, but they just know he's important. And so the Santi are just like wasting so much energy on a guy that like trying to figure out. Imagine, and I don't think he's an idiot at all, but like maybe he doesn't have his life together enough to really come up, like to really deserve a spot on that. And if they're poring over everything he does to try and like read the tea leaves of somebody who doesn't deserve to have that position, that could be wasting Sophon's time a decent amount and maybe allowing others. I don't think that's the case, but that is like a small part of me. The other more likely aspect is that he does get his shit together and he does fully embrace and do something very positive with this position.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely going to be right because like I've taken both sides.
Right. It's both states happening at once, just like Constellation. Gotcha.
Yes,
I'm there.
yes.
I
Yes.
didn't think about the wasting time for the Sophons, but we did
That'd
see
be messed up.
that is a theory like of keeping the Sophons busy, and I could see Saul being that person where it's like he seems smart enough.
He's smart enough that it's believable that it's not just a distraction.
Right. I could
Which
see that.
then, like anything he does, then it's like, well, why would one of the smartest people do that? Because maybe he's smart enough to come up with like a good idea, but it's not great.
Right.
And they're like, that's not what's he planning?
Right. Okay. Do you think that anybody other than Thomas Wade is going to freeze themselves?
I mean, the guy looking after Jin's goldfish is the only other person who wants to.
Edgar? I think his name's Edgar.
I, I I don't think that he's going to be allowed the chance.
Poor Edgar. Yeah. This is what I was talking about with the fish. Now Edgar, who had no intention of buying a fish or taking care of a fish, is now stuck with taking care of this goldfish, which did not have enough water in that bowl, by the way. Just
Edgar was ready to fall on the sword and like do something to save humanity and have his brain removed and put on a rocket that he didn't know if it was going to work. And he was basically laughed at and then told, "Look, you're good enough to watch a goldfish."
that's all you can do. You're just a
That's,
personal assistant. We don't need you for much more. You're just here to help us get things done.
yeah, I feel bad for Edgar.
Poor Edgar. Okay, and then I guess I have one last question. I think it was a great choice to not see what the Santi actually look like, or like see their perspective other than when they come in and speak to the main characters.
Hmm.
Do you think that we'll ever see what the Santi look like
I think it's going to happen at some point.
next season or the season after?
Probably season after.
Probably.
That's my guess.
Unless Will is intercepted next season. Though I could see Will being intercepted at like the end of the next season.
Yeah.
And then the third season is like from Will's perspective on the Santi. Maybe. We'll see. I don't know.
We'll see. We'll see.
But I'm excited to find out.
I'm very excited to find out.
But with that, our journey has come to an end. Thank you folks so much for joining us through Three Body Problem. Next week, we are starting a brand new show called Dark Matter. It is on Apple TV, and we will be releasing that weekly on Mondays, just like this show. So come back, join us next week after you watch Dark Matter, and we'll see you there. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.